Hello, I'm Scott McGregor. Welcome to Railway Adventures across Australia. Welcome to New South Wales, and welcome to the most easterly part of the Australian continent, Cape Byron. I'm Scott McGregor, and this is where we begin our New South Wales adventure. From here, we're heading south via Dorrigo, Newcastle, Mudgee, Carcoar to Sydney, then out to the Silver City, Broken Hill. But did you know, every morning, the sun shines here first, Cape Byron. This attractive-looking lighthouse behind me has been saving ships along this coastline since 1901. The old lighthouse has played both comforter and guide to navigators sailing up and down this coastline ever since. Its light, floating in a bath of mercury, is a work of art in itself, having the intensity of 3 million candles. 109 miles from Brisbane and 500 miles from Sydney, Byron Bay is a great holiday destination. It's the subtropical climate and the magic qualities of the place that attracts them. Beautiful long beaches set against a magnificent backdrop of mountains. These qualities not only attract humans here in abundance, but also dolphins, whales, and other sea creatures. Just down the hill from the lighthouse is the village of Byron Bay itself. It's a lively place that combines the atmosphere of a country town and a beachside resort. I'm told that tourist overload during the holiday season puts a real strain on the environment, and the locals have been battling the big developers for years in an effort to avoid the high-rise fate of the Gold Coast. Byron Bay wasn't always a tourist resort. For years, it was simply a timber and beef town on the north coast. Then, in 1954, it became a busy whaling station. The official season was from May to the end of October each year. It's then that the humpback whales migrate north from the Antarctic to tropical waters to give birth to their calves. The annual quota in 1959 was 150 whales, and by the time the industry collapsed in 1962, 1,146 humpback whales had been processed at this local meatworks. It's an interesting little loco. I wonder what happened to it. I'm told it's still around, so while we're here, we may as well have a look for it. Follow the track out of town and look for a new tin shed, one of the locals said. This looks likely. I think I've found it. What a little beauty. Meet the green frog, as this little loco was affectionately known. She was a much-loved sight in Byron Bay in the old days, giving faithful service to the community for over 60 years. This little 1923 simplex petrol locomotive was the backbone of industry here in Byron Bay. It hauled the dairy, the beef, the timber, the whales. It even hauled passengers occasionally. Solid as a rock, all cast iron, weighs 8 tonnes. What a little ripper. It's nice to see she's been treated with a bit of respect in her old age. Byron Bay railway station is right in the middle of town, which is very convenient because it's just about time for us to head south.
I promised myself to be in Sydney in 3 days' time. That's 765 kilometres away as the crow flies, because I've got a date with the Indian Pacific. The famous train that's going to take me 2,500 miles across the nation to Perth in the west, through some of the most incredible country on this earth. I can't wait for that one. But in the meantime, I've got to get myself to Sydney, and I've promised myself no cars, buses or aeroplanes, strictly train only.
Now, I could take the direct route and be there in 12 hours, but as I told you, I'm going to take a few detours, which means that the schedule's going to be pretty tight.
I can't believe this. A pub at a railway station. Don't see that every day. Excellent.
Okay, mate. Yeah, really good.
Hey, Tom.
G'day, Scott. What are you doing here?
Hey, trekking around, yeah.
Trekking around or training around?
Always training around. I mean, listen, mate, I've always wanted to know the story behind this place. I mean, why is it here?
Well, it was originally a refreshment room for the trains. The trains first come through at the turn of the century. But since about 1952, it's been a private lease, and it's become sort of part and parcel of the character of Byron Bay.
Right.
Any night on the bar, there'd be barristers and backpackers, surfing bums and bank managers and bricklayers, all lined up together, you know, and it's sort of become a bit of an Australian tourist icon, I'd say.
Icon? You're not kidding. Look around the walls.
Yeah.
Looks like a bit of an icon to fishing to me.
Two fishermen left their reels here, that's all.
Did they? Oh, so you're a bit of a collector as well, yeah?
Most of them in better condition than the ones I fish with, Scott.
Is that right?
Time to be moving on. The service from Byron Bay to Sydney is by express train, functional and quick. As I said earlier, I could be in Sydney in 12 hours or so if I stayed on this train. But where's the fun in that? I've got a few mates I want to catch up with on the way down. I also like to see a few things when I travel, even if it means going out of my way a bit. I've come here to meet the banana growers of Woolgoolga. Their fields are on the outskirts of town, just north of Coffs Harbour. These people have nothing to do with trains, but they're such an unusual part of the Australian landscape that I just had to visit them. Not the sort of architecture you'd expect to see as you drive into an Australian country town. A couple of servos or sheds, a big banana maybe, but not a temple that looks like it's dropped out of the sky from India. It's Sunday. The whole community has come to the temple to worship, maintaining their ties with their homeland, India, and in particular with their Sikh religion. The first Sikhs came to Woolgoolga in the early 1940s as banana growers. Apart from anything else, Sikhs are instantly recognisable by their appearance. For example, their religion dictates that the men never cut their hair, hence the beards and the distinctive turbans. The women wear beautiful pyjama-like trousers, which are fastened at the ankles and topped by a long skirt. Jorava Aka, otherwise known as John, is one of the young leaders of the community.
Do you find it hard to maintain this culture in an Australian country town?
Well, actually, the Australian country town allows us to maintain our culture because we're close-knit, because we work together in our banana plantations, we get together here at the temple.
It seems inevitable that in this day and age, some young people will choose not to maintain the Sikh lifestyle. But the Sikhs of Woolgoolga are strong in spirit and well able to take the modern world in their stride.
I promised myself if ever I was up this way, I'd give my old mate Keith a hand restoring a few railway carriages. Yeah, looks like he needs a bit of help. Incredible, isn't it?
This is the Dorrigo Steam Railway and Museum. It's the largest collection of railway engines and rolling stock in the Southern Hemisphere. None of it goes, yet. It just sits here on top of the mountain. But Keith Jones and the members of the museum have big plans for this place.
How did the museum come about? What's the story behind it?
Well, it really started because I had a burning desire to save one steam engine from being cut up for scrap. It's way back in 1973-74. And from there it's grown as the members have grown, and we're now preserving almost anything from any railway in New South Wales.
It may look a bit chaotic now, but a vision is definitely in place. The members want to establish a world-class railway museum first, all undercover. Then they plan to operate a tourist railway on the disused Dorrigo branch line.
Well, in our opinion, the Dorrigo branch line's the most scenic line in New South Wales. The line's intact. It's in a good tourist region, so we should get patronage. So moving the collection from Newcastle 300 miles to here was a huge job, but we think well worth the effort.
At present, the collection boasts 54 locomotives, 280 carriages and wagons, and 13 rail motors, and tons of other stuff. The locos range from 8-tonne shunting units to massive 260-tonne garrets, the largest locomotives in the Southern Hemisphere. Many of the engines here are over 100 years old. One day, I guess, they'll even have an XPT. Now, the good news is they've just purchased half the old branch line for the princely sum of $1, which means the museum will soon be open and trains will once more run again on the Dorrigo line.
This is Newcastle. I'm on the local rail motor service into town. Not a bad little beast for 1948.
Newcastle is rightly called the hub of the Hunter Valley. It's a maritime city, highly industrialised, and with an attractive twist to it, which I'll show you later. Originally founded in 1797 as a penal colony for exporting coal and salt, the coal exporting side of the business is still going strong in the 1990s. Much of the industry in Newcastle is winding down now, leading the locals to turn their minds to other things to keep their city vibrant. Tourism is now high on the agenda, and with very good reason too. Remember I said Newcastle had a twist to it? Well, how many industrialised cities in the world do you know that have fantastic surf beaches like these right in the inner city suburbs? There's plenty of history too. At the harbour mouth, Nobby's Lighthouse, with its convict-built breakwater, is a landmark for the ships that enter and leave the port every day. This is Fort Scratchley, built in 1881 to defend the young colony against the Russians. They seem to get the blame for everything. It last defended the city during World War II, when it fired on some Japanese submarines. It was the last time these guns were fired in anger. Submarines that attacked Newcastle on the night of the 8th of June 1942 later on moved down the coast and opened fire on Sydney. The Hunter Valley region around Newcastle is famous for its coal and its wine. An unusual mix, you might think, but apparently the two industries get on okay. Thought we'd go up to the vineyards and have a bit of a look around.
The coal comes down from the Hunter Valley by train on its way to be shipped overseas. That's how I plan to get up to the vineyards. I'm catching an empty coal train heading back up.
Remember, no buses, cars or planes.
G'day, I'm Scott.
Scott, Keith Gilbert.
Good on you, Keith.
Scott.
Cheers.
How are you? Gary Hollier.
Good on you, Gary. All right. So which is our train?
That's the number of all the trucks.
Right.
And there's 84 trucks. There's 1,420 metres long.
About 60 million tonnes of coal is dug out of the Hunter each year. That's a lot of coal. No wonder these trains are so long. First of the vineyards.
Where mate, the vineyards, have miles and miles out here now. It's all new stuff out here.
Right.
Apparently it was Governor Lachlan Macquarie in the early 1800s who suggested growing grapes up here. He wanted to encourage the drinking of wine and discourage the rum trade that was ruining Sydney at the time. It's grown into a nice little business since then. Some of the early wine-growing families, like the Lindemans, the Draytons, the McWilliams and the Tyrrells, have now become household names. Brian McGregor is a third-generation winemaker whose family have been making wine in the Hunter Valley for over 50 years.
What's really required for good winemaking?
Well, the most important thing really is what we're walking on. That's the soil here.
Right.
Without the right soil, if you don't get the character into the grapes, you don't get the character into the wine. And so the soil is of great importance, as is, of course, the weather. The Australian climate is just ideal for growing grapes. We have all this beautiful sunshine here, and really sunshine is the key to Australian wine, because the factory of the vine is the leaf, and all it needs is sunshine to make sugar.
So this is the magic mix between the acid and the sugar that we're talking about?
Absolutely. As the sugar comes up, the acid comes down, and it's when those two chemicals are in balance that the winemaker picks the grapes and then tries to capture all that flavour in the bottle. Liquid sunshine in the bottle.
All right.
And that's what the world loves.
So as well as the mechanical pickers, you're still doing any by hand?
Oh yes, we use the mechanical harvesters mainly, Scott, but we have some specialised blocks where we have hand pickers in to make sure that we address the picking well, but they're very particular and very capable people.
And so this is a special technique that you need to have special skills for?
Absolutely, and a lot of energy.
Energy?
Yeah, a lot of that too.
All right. Oh, well, I mean, you know, if you needed an extra hand, I'm quite open to helping out.
You mean you?
Oh, I'd like to give this a go. This sounds quite good. Why not?
Well, let me tell you, we're a bit short tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's no way you could keep up with the locals. No way.
This sounds like a challenge, Brian.
Absolutely.
The gauntlet's down. I'm in there.
At 6 o'clock in the morning.
6 o'clock in the morning. Here's cheers. I'm there.
Let's go.
All right.
Ah, fresh air, a spectacular dawn, and the ancient art of grape picking. I thought I'd better team up with a friendly local if I was going to get anywhere with this caper.
So, Sasha, I've got my pickers. Now, give me the technique.
The technique is very simple. Don't squash the grapes.
Don't squash
the grapes.
All right.
Grab them from the bottom and clip them at the stem so that we don't squash them.
You don't want too much stem, right?
Oh, no, a little bit of stem's okay. But preferably no leaves, if you can.
Yeah, we're getting them. Now, what are we picking today, Sasha?
These are Merlot grapes.
Merlot.
Yeah. They're sweet. They're beautiful. They're beautiful grapes.
Yeah, are you able to discern the quality of the grape just from having a taste?
Yeah, you can. The really little tiny ones don't seem to have as much flavour
Right.
as the big ones.
The pickers are paid by the bucket. In order to count how much they pick in a day, each person is given a number. As they empty their buckets, they call out their number, and the bucket is recorded against their name.
Oh, I got that one, Bim.
He does that to
Mate.
me too.
There you go, Brian. Hey.
Good one.
Oh, my aching back. Mechanical harvesting might be less labour intensive, but I reckon hand picking is more fun. Sasha earns $1.50 a bucket, and the average is about 50 buckets a day. So it's hard graft for a modest return.
I better get a move on. The Indian Pacific leaves in a day and a half. Now, we're about 200 kilometres from Sydney as the crow flies, but I'm saying goodbye to the Hunter Valley and I'm heading inland. I'm on a pretty tight schedule here. Really tight, but I think it's going to be worthwhile.
This coal train will take us close to Mutchee, so I want to go back there for a while and pick something up.
I've come home because I want to show you my favourite railway line in New South Wales. It's the Carcoar branch line, from Carcoar through to Cowra.
It's a great run through some historic countryside on the Central Tablelands.
Unfortunately, like so many other little lines around the country, no trains run on this one anymore. So I'm going to have to use my own steam.
The line was put through to Cowra in 1888, and it goes through some classic countryside.
Never forget the rules and regulations about heading into a tunnel. Whistle! Once upon a time, these parts were alive with bushrangers, most notably Ben Hall and the John Gilbert gang. They terrorised the poor folk around here right through the 1860s until the law caught up with them and hung them. They were after the gold, of course. There used to be a lot of it discovered around here. You're probably wondering what I'm riding on here today. It's officially known as a Trafalgar velocipede, more commonly known as a hand trike. 70 kilometres an hour, they must be kidding. These little things were used in and around station yards to fix signals and do odd jobs like that. This is a rare two-man version, dates from about 1900. It must have been hard work working one of these across the countryside day in, day out. I feel like I'm making a railway exercise video. Oh, you know, you're working. Not a bad little station, eh? Carcoar's a sleepy little town now, but back in 1866, it was the second biggest town west of the Blue Mountains. I'm going to take a break, head into town, have a cup of tea.
Today, Carcoar's a lovely spot. The whole town's classified by the National Trust. Gold made these places grow, And like so many other mining stories, when the gold ran out, the town shrank. It's hard to believe now, but this place was the business centre for the whole district once.
Being an administrative centre meant lots of banks. And of course they attracted bushrangers like flies to the honeypot.
In July 1863, the bushrangers John Gilbert and John O'Mealy attempted to hold up this place, which was the commercial bank back then.
They failed. But they do go down in history as having carried out Australia's first daylight bank robbery.
On the surface, Cowra is a typical New South Wales country town. But there are special international links that make this place unique. For example, the people of Cowra go to great lengths to nurture the ideals of peace and international friendship. This is exemplified through Australia's World Peace Bell in Civic Square. The bell is a replica of the original, which hangs in the United Nations building in New York. The community's efforts to foster these ideals go back to World War II, when a prisoner of war camp was built here. Constructed in 1941, the camp initially held Italian and German prisoners of war, but in 1944 it was extended to hold Korean, Formosan and Japanese prisoners. Disgraced by their capture, the Japanese sought to overcome their shame in the most dramatic way possible. At 1:50 a.m. on the 5th of August 1944, the largest prisoner of war breakout in modern military history took place at Cowra. Over 1,000 Japanese prisoners launched a suicidal attack on their guards, the Australian soldiers of the 22nd Garrison. By the time the breakout was over, 231 Japanese and 4 Australians lay dead. The Japanese who died in the breakout were buried here in Cowra, and the local ex-servicemen have taken it upon themselves to look after their graves. From that first humanitarian gesture grew a desire to understand more about the culture of a people who had once been their enemy. Today, these sentiments have been translated into beautiful Japanese gardens, symbolising goodwill and a celebration of nature. Since 1978, over 60,000 people a year have visited the Japanese Garden and Cultural Centre. There's just one other place I have to visit before I hightail it towards Sydney: the Lachlan Valley Railway. This is their roundhouse. There's not too many of these left in New South Wales these days. I like this place because the facility is big, but the collection itself is small and selective. The engines and rolling stock are typical of a range of items used in New South Wales at the height of the railway period.
This partially restored engine gives you an idea of how a steam locomotive actually works. See all these little holes here? They're like little chimneys coming through the boiler. Smoke goes up the chimney there. The steam goes to the top of the boiler, going down these pipes here into the cylinder, pushing the piston back, which then drives the locomotive forward. Now, it's time I made a serious run for Sydney and my date with the Indian Pacific. I've got to get up and over the Blue Mountains first. Normally, that's a fairly straightforward exercise. I jump on a train here at Lithgow, and along this line here, 10 tunnels later and 2 hours later, I'm in Sydney. But I'd like to do something much more interesting. I'm going to go on the old route, in this 1960s retro rail motor. But first, I've got to find my driver.
At just 5 miles in length, the Zigzag Railway was once acclaimed as one of the great engineering wonders of the 19th century. It was built between 1866 and 1869 to enable trains to negotiate the steep western face of the mountains. The remaining tourist line operates between Clarence at the top and Lithgow at the bottom. Finding a route over the Blue Mountains and into the rich western plains beyond was a real economic problem for the government last century. In the wake of the gold rush, an ever-increasing number of settlers were moving out west. People were agitating loudly for a railway connection to Sydney. After much deliberation, it was decided that a series of lengthy tunnels through the mountains was far too expensive. A giant zigzag was the cheapest option. Now that I've found my driver, we can get going.
Well, we'll just get the air on and we'll go.
Meet Michael Forbes. He's been with the railway for over 25 years, so he knows this line like the back of his hand.
The bottom road of the Great Zigzag is still used by the State Rail Authority, so it's still part of the line to Broken Hill in the west.
Okay.
We actually have our depot on the site of the original bottom road. They just carved a giant Z in the side of the hill. So if you imagine the 3 bars of the Z are your tracks. They all slope gently down into the valley at a grade of 1 in 42. That's 1 foot down for every 42 feet you travel. And that sort of grade can be handled safely by a train.
We're on the middle road.
We are now on the middle road of the Great Lithgow Zigzag.
Yeah, see, I know the route.
Bring it to a halt. And now what we've got to do is swap ends. Got to drive from the other end.
So we go up the other end?
Yep.
We've come up as far as Top Points. It's here that the train reverses direction to go along the top bar of the Z.
Excellent. 2 bells from the guard means everybody's locked in and we can leave.
We're now travelling along the top road of the Z towards the station at Clarence. The line has always operated in both directions, of course. But in the old days, the downhill run was no picnic for steam locomotive drivers, as Marcus, the zigzag conductor, explains.
Yeah, well, in the days of the zigzag, when they were using it as the only means of getting trains down the mountain, the drivers had quite a feet in front of them. Back then, they were bringing them down pretty much unbraked. Took them up to about 3 hours to get a normal train down the zigzag. If you tried to come down any quicker, it would have disastrous effects.
And that happened here?
Yes, in 1901, this train lost control coming down the hill, hung out over the edge of the cliff, just over there.
No one was hurt, but the train nearly went over the edge and into the valley below. The driver and the fireman jumped off just in the nick of time. Some tunnelling was still necessary, and there are 2 tunnels on the route. One on the top road near Clarence, and another on the bottom road. When this line was completed in 1869, a writer from England, journeying out to the just-finished work, wrote glowingly of the pluck and enterprise of the colony of New South Wales in conceiving and carrying successfully through such a gigantic and wonderful undertaking. Lofty praise indeed, and fully justified, don't you think?
See you, Michael. Thanks, mate. Well, let's hit the big smoke.
If someone from another country asked me what Sydney was all about, I'd say to them, look and lifestyle. Sydney is flashy, fast and vibrant. Founded in 1788, it's the oldest city in Australia, and its beautiful deep water harbour makes it one of the most famous and attractive cities in the world. Even in the late 1920s, it was a busy city, and ferries like these kept both sides of the harbour connected. This was before the Sydney Harbour Bridge was completed in 1932. The first train to cross the new bridge. The first of many that these days carries thousands of passengers a day. This is Sydney's premier railway station, Central.
Yes, I've made it. Central Station. Most capital cities have a grand station like this. Built in 1906, 25 platforms. This grand concourse says it all. I'm off to platform 1 and a date with the Indian Pacific.
We're about to begin our epic journey across the continent. This leg, Sydney to Broken Hill. There's always a sense of adventure in the air as the Indian Pacific prepares to leave Sydney. We've got passengers from all walks of life, people going back to Perth, tourists, backpackers, and people like me, just going along for the ride.
There we go, that's the one.
Yeah.
Cross you off here.
Excellent. On time today?
We sure are.
Very good.
No worries. Have a nice trip.
See ya. Here we go. All right. He said compartment 4 and 3. Home away from home. Look at this. This is a classic twinette compartment. The bunks will come down for nighttime use, set up for daytime at the moment. Got my own little hanging cupboard here. Got a little card table here. Everything's organised, lights are on. Got the ticket there. In here, shower and toilet. Look at this cute little room. So we have our basin here, hot and cold. Our toilet. Oh yes. Fantastic little unit. I love railway carriages. They're so compact and practical.
This is one of the longest train journeys in the world. 2,720 miles. For 3 days and 3 nights on the train to Perth. First though, we head out through the city suburbs and back up the Blue Mountains. Then to the big country, overnight to our first stop, Broken Hill.
The Sydney suburbs roll past like names on a timetable. One name sticks out though. That's the name of Granville, the site of Australia's worst railway disaster. This bridge here is significant.
It's the Bold Street overpass. It fell on the 8:37 train from Mount Victoria, killing 83 people and injuring 220 in 1977.
We've just come off a section of track called the Speedway. The steam train drivers called it that for obvious reasons. It was the area they used to test the speed of locomotives in the olden days. Yeah, the food's really improved on the train.
Once, not so long ago, you'd be quite right in calling it stodgy. But not anymore. Nowadays, more fresh food's on offer. That, with a bit of competition from other forms of transport, have lifted the standard dramatically.
Even the wine list's not to be scoffed at. While I've been dining, the conductor's been busy. Well, good night then. See you in the morning.
Good morning.
Oh, Annie. Hey, cup of tea.
Let's see for you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hey, Annie, where are we?
Just before Menindee.
Excellent. Look at this. How civilised. I'm in the first sitting for breakfast. Didn't have a bad night's sleep either. So I better get up and at it.
These are the Menindee Lakes, part of the Great Darling River system. Bit of a shock to see so much water out here in the desert. But there it is. Good fishing, I'm told, too.
Overnight, we've come down the Blue Mountains, across the Central Tablelands, and here we are on the Great Western Plains. We're about an hour out of Broken Hill. Broken Hill's chock-a-block full of history. Can't wait to have a look around. The next Indian Pacific doesn't come through for a while, so gives me plenty of time.
Broken Hill is known as Australia's Silver City, the centre of the outback, an oasis of comfort in the desert. It's all true. Ore was discovered here in 1883 when a fella called Charles Rasp practically tripped over the ore. He thought it was tin at first, so he pegged a lease on what was known as the Broken Hill. It turned out to be silver, lead and zinc, and from that day on, the place never looked back. Broken Hill could once lay claim to one of the richest ore bodies in the world. But like all good things, one day it must run out. On present predictions, they estimate that there's only 8 years of ore left to mine. I love the street names. They proclaim the city's mining heritage in no uncertain terms. The landscape around Broken Hill, though beautiful, can also be harsh and unforgiving. These sculptures were carved here on this mountain in local sandstone by a group of Australian and international artists in 1993. They're a real testament to the inspiration and beauty of the living desert landscape around Broken Hill. This is Daydream Mine, one of the earliest in the area. It was first worked in 1882 by some very tough little Cornish miners. Remember, this is before Charles Rasp had pegged the Broken Hill. Kevin White looks after Daydream. He's a fund of knowledge about the miners who lived here.
The actual main street and the township of Daydream was up over the bend there. And the early writings talk about it having a general store, a butcher's shop, a bakery, a police station, and 2 pubs. They also talk of it having 10 ladies of the night.
Is that right?
In its heyday, there were 500 residents at Daydream, which included 150 men who worked the mine and about 20 boys known as picky boys. They were between 10 and 15 years old, and their job was to haul the rock out of the mine by hand and then pick over it for the valuable ore. It was a tough job, and living conditions were basic. The miners lived in hessian tents or rough shelters they dug out of the ground called mires.
What, he just crawled in there in the evening and slept?
Yep. You can imagine the sort of conditions they lived. They would have frozen in winter and cooked in summer.
The miners worked 12 hours a day down the mine for 6 days a week, so they probably didn't have much trouble sleeping anyway. As you walk into this mine, you realise that these shafts were dug before the days of pneumatic drills and other mechanised mining tools. In all, the miners dug over 2.5 miles of shafts on 4 different levels, using picks, shovels and a bit of dynamite.
How deep does it go?
288 feet in the old terms.
Yeah.
Scott, we're now coming into the big open stope.
There's rails here. What's the story?
The railway system was put in by the late owner. He came in 1964 and worked the Daydream.
Oh, so they're not original?
They did have railway, but not in this section of the Daydream.
Oh, OK. Yeah, everywhere you go, there's a railway.
The ore seam you can see here is 500 million years old, and the host rock, so the geologists tell Kevin, is even older. In this one stope alone, they pulled out 95,000 tonnes of rock and put 71,000 tonnes of it back again.
Why did they do that? Why did they put it all back?
They were mostly the Cornish, and the Cornish were noted for safety, fill them back in to hold their backs up. What a job it would have been, eh?
And what's this?
That's an old picky boy box. One boy would stand at the front, one at the rear, and they'd carry that when it was full of ore rock to the closest shaft. Unload the bags of ore that they've loaded, and then the boys would go back and pick more ore.
Kevin says the boys could only work for about 2 years before their eyes became so infected with conjunctivitis they could hardly see anymore. Then, at the age of about 12 or 15, they were finished in the mines for good, which is probably just as well, because the adult miners, who also suffer the dusty conditions and poor diet, rarely lived beyond the age of 40.
You know, there's a predictability about mining. Ore gets discovered, a town springs up out of nowhere, the ore runs out, the town disappears.
This is Silverton, 16 miles up the road from Broken Hill. It was booming in 1885. In fact, everyone thought it was going to be bigger than Broken Hill itself. Then the ore petered out and the town died away.
But before Silverton died, it gave its name to an enterprising little private railway called the Silverton Tramway Company.
At the time, the Silverton ore was being carted over the border to Coburn in South Australia by bullock wagon. From there, the ore went on to Port Pirie by rail. The New South Wales government didn't want to push their railway the extra 16 miles from Broken Hill to pick up the ore and take it to New South Wales.
But the Silverton Tramway Company thought it was a good idea. They were prepared to go to the expense, as this magnificent cutting testifies, to bring the line from South Australia through to Silverton. Sadly, by the time the line was finished, so was Silverton. And instead of stopping here, the line went right on through down this main street to Broken Hill. This is why Broken Hill's so closely aligned with South Australia. It even runs on South Australian Central Time.
And the Silverton Tramway also figures in another remarkable tale.
On New Year's Day in 1915, Broken Hill witnessed the first shots fired on Australian soil as an act of war during wartime. At the time, we were at war with Turkey, but most of the battles were a long way from Australia's shores.
Here in Broken Hill, a trainload of picnickers seated in open trucks pulled noisily out of Broken Hill, bound for the annual New Year's Day picnic at Silverton. Hampers and rugs were packed beneath the wooden forms. High-spirited banter flew from truck to truck as the train pulled out of Sulphide Street Station. Beside the track stood an ice cream cart, flying the Turkish flag. Suddenly there was the sound of gunfire and a young woman slumped forward, her head shattered by a bullet.
On that day, over 80 years ago, war came to Broken Hill. 4 innocent people lost their lives and 7 others were wounded.
The 2 aggressors, fighting under the Turkish flag, were actually a local Afghani and an Indian. They were hunted down by the police and killed.
Why did they do it? Maybe the truth will never be known.
But one theory has it that they were sick of being ostracised as Muslims. Whatever the reason, the ghosts of the 2 men still seem to linger here at White Rocks. That story is just one of the many colourful tales about this place. It's played an amazing part in our history and still does, even today. Poised here on the edge of the desert, the town acts like a symbolic gateway to the west. I get the feeling it's time to be moving on.
Well, that's Broken Hill. And that's New South Wales. Next stop, South Australia and my next railway adventure. See you then.